Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you today, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. I also apologize, I have a little bit of a cold, so my voice will be a little bit raspy. So I work for Y Combinator Research, which, like Lab 2050, is a fairly new organization. It was started in 2015 by the president of Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator in Silicon Valley that has seed-funded such startups as Airbnb, Dropbox, and Reddit. Now, Sam Altman, who is the president of Y Combinator, has a front row seat to a lot of the technological changes happening. He's seeing companies pitch ideas involving AI and other types of disruptive technologies, and decided that we needed to start thinking about what will the future look like. And we need to start, even if those changes aren't happening quite yet, we need to begin experimenting and trying to explore lots of different possibilities so that when the time comes, we're ready to implement a policy that we believe is most effective. So one of the first projects they decided was to conduct a basic income experiment. And they announced that they were going to plan to do this in early 2016. And there were a couple motivations that Sam had and others for this project. One is, as I just mentioned, the changing nature of work and the uncertainty about the demand for labor. And that doesn't mean just that there aren't jobs, but that existing jobs are much less secure. They don't pay enough to live comfortably. Hours are volatile, income is volatile. And so it's difficult to make ends meet. But then also, with all of this technology is creating immense wealth. And in a place of such abundance, there should not be the type of poverty that we have in the United States. And so something like a basic income is a moral obligation it's an opportunity to eliminate absolute poverty as we currently define it. So a lot of the economic trends that I'm going to talk about, we already saw in the first speaker that a lot of things that are happening in Korea are also happening in the United States. If we look at economic growth since 1980, there's been enormous economic growth. And incomes of the top 1% have grown very much, but the median household income has only grown by 16.5%. So a lot of the gains from this growth are going disproportionately to the wealthiest and those that own the capital. We also see now that by about 2014, the top 10% of earners in the United States earn more than the bottom 90% combined. So income inequality is staggering. Another disconcerting trend is that intergenerational mobility has really declined. For individuals born in the post-war and during the war around the 1940s, over 90% of children born earned more than their parents earned. And by the time more recent data that's available is children born in 1984, just about 50% earned more. So it's becoming more and more difficult to become upwardly economically mobile across the population. Also, job growth, this is a somewhat confusing graph, but we can see, first of all, that over the decades, the number of net new jobs created is decreasing. We had actually a negative period during the Great Recession. It's increased again somewhat since then. But of those jobs created, almost net all of them are what they call alternative work arrangements. So it's contract employment, the gig economy, where there does not have like a stable income, a secure job with benefits. Some of them do pay well, but it's just much less uncertain. It's much less certain than it used to be. And this was also another study done that showed that in terms of more than 55% of Americans experience a more than 30% month-to-month change in income. And that was a shocking number to me. It makes it very difficult when your income changes so much to plan for the future. And that is much higher among lower income individuals and young adults. And finally, the US has a very patchwork safety net. We have a lot of different programs. There are a lot of holes in it. There are a lot of people that are categorically ineligible, as Taylor Joe talked about. But also, the second bar seems to have disappeared from the graph, but what you would see there is that with this safety net that we have, it only cuts poverty in half. Now it does great work at cutting poverty in half, but then there's still 15% of the population still lives in poverty. And a lot of those are families with children. So what are we thinking looking forward? I mean, how will governments, these trends show no signs of stopping. So how will governments and civil society respond to address these? And there's so many different ways, and I'm just gonna touch on a couple right now, and these are purely conjecture. This is just sort of brainstorming ideas. But some opportunities for policy change, including regulation, both about how we adopt these new technologies and also how we regulate job quality. You know, do we make employers offer certain benefits? How are companies held to certain standards? And then also the social contract, the social safety net. And this sort of schematic here, I look at sort of 4 different potential scenarios. Again, these are very rough, but along 2 axes. One is sort of the pace of technological change. You know, there are a lot of people that argue that we won't have this massive disruption, that it was predicted, you know, before, during the Industrial Revolution and all these other periods, and you know, we created new jobs and there was a shift, and that we may not see that. So we have sort of a pace of here, whether it grows fast or slow. And then we also have the degree of shared prosperity on the vertical axis. So as these gains, who benefits? Right now it's becoming increasingly the higher income and the capital owners benefit, and the majority of the population does not. And so if we have slow technological change, but the government begins to intervene and try to create a stronger safety net, particularly in the US where we don't have one, you know, we could see that continued economic growth at about the same pace. We could see that regulation can sort of improve the quality of jobs so that it makes it easier for people to make ends meet. And the government could take a more active role in fashioning sort of redistribution and a safety net to make sure that more people are benefiting. On that other end of it, if the government does not stay involved and does not get more involved, we could see sort of the status quo worsening in some ways. We could see regulation impeding the adoption of technologies, so we don't have that sort of growth in productivity that we could perhaps expect to see. But then the quality of existing jobs further erode. We see more and more inequality and growing poverty. On the other side, if some of these benefits of technology actually come to fruition, on the lower quadrant, we could see where there's enormous growth in innovation and in productivity and in wealth from this. You could see a lot of economic growth initially, but if governments don't adapt the safety net, all those benefits and that wealth is going to go to a certain portion of the population. And what is the rest of the population going to do? And there are going to be eventually fewer and fewer people to buy those goods and services. And so what will the economy look like then? What's the long term? You're going to have many people left behind. And then there's the sort of perhaps the ideal, the robust tech-enabled growth, where we do adopt technology, but the government and civil society are involved in ways that, you know, protect and the quality of jobs, ensure that people whose jobs are replaced have opportunities to retrain and learn new skills for the new types of jobs that are created by technology, that we have a safety net that provides the security that allows people to live and flourish in this new economy, and we also have enormous economic growth that we can then redistribute, and that would be more towards the sort of utopia that we talk about. But these are all depend on what the future looks like, and these are just pure, you know, ideas of what could happen, but it all depends on the choices that we make now and in the future. So one potential solution for a way the government could be involved has been talked about: universal basic income. It is, as it's been discussed already, it's a universal, unconditional, individual benefit given out to citizens to allow them to meet their basic needs. Some of the ways that people talk about it being beneficial in terms of ending poverty, fostering economic growth, sparking entrepreneurship, giving people the freedom to define their lives, even promote civic and social engagement as people have more time and are less stressed and able to be more invested in their communities. And reduce the complexity of the social safety net. Rather than have to apply for 20 different agencies for different benefits, you could receive a basic income. The question for us is, we're not saying, oh, this is the best way to approach this, but we want to begin to test it because it is such a popular idea right now. So how do we design a study that can begin to test whether some of these benefits come to fruition? And our goal here is to bridge the gaps between economic and social analyses. Often we have the economists that are looking purely at things like employment and the numbers, but we also want to bring in the social analyses to understand the comprehensive effects on individuals and their families of receiving unconditional cash. So we're planning a large-scale randomized controlled trial where we will have a large group, we're going to recruit about 10,000 participants total, but about 8,000 of them will be a control group that will not receive a basic income. And we'll compare those to individuals who do receive a basic income. They'll receive $1,000 per month for 3 years for some, and they'll have a smaller group that receives it for 5 years. The sample will be completely random. It'll be in 2 different states in the United States, and it'll be limited to individuals ages 21 to 40 whose household income does not exceed the median. So we are going up into the middle class, but for purposes of the study, we're limiting it to the median and below. And very broadly, we're taking a sort of a two-pronged approach to study this. Because on the one hand, there are pretty clear hypotheses out there about what we might see. These are very measurable types of things like health would improve or mental health would improve or people work less or work more. And so we wanted to have a large sample to be able to test these with statistical significance. We'll use surveys, administrative data collected by the government, and even financial transaction data to measure consumption. But we also really want to understand the how and the why. So what is leading to the effects that we observe? What are the pathways of impact? So we can really understand basic income is not a singular policy. There are so many different ways that it can be structured, could be paid for, and there's so many, people might still face a number of constraints and challenges, and we want to understand those. So in a lot of ways, it's also an exploratory study to try to understand sort of the lay of the land and begin to draw up a theory about what a basic income policy could look like, or cash transfers. And so we will have a smaller group, not the full sample, but a smaller group will conduct in-depth interviews, have more open-ended survey questions, and spend more time with them to get to know them and their families and the decisions they make. So we already actually ran a feasibility study very small that ran for 1 year that really allowed us to just see, could we do this? Would people participate? Would they be willing to give us the kind of data that we needed? We also were running smaller operational pilots, and we're planning to launch the full study in January of 2019. Very briefly, I'm not going to go through all of the outcomes, but just briefly, at a very high level, what do we hope to learn from studying this? So one is well-being, both subjective, so how do people feel like they are doing? What is their hopeful? Are they stressed? Things like that, but also materially. How's their housing stability and neighborhood quality and all those types of things. So a range of outcomes, both material and subjective. Then also, are there changes in mental and physical health? Not just as Taylor Jo alluded, we don't have free health care. So do people access preventative care more often? That could lead to savings and social costs in the future. We're looking at financial health. Not just do you give people more money so they have more money, but are they able to build up a resilience? Are they able to weather shocks like an unexpected expense where they have the savings? How do they spend their time? Do they pursue further education? Do parents maybe work fewer hours but spend more time with their children? And what effect might that have in the future? In terms of employment, Do people become more entrepreneurial? Do they maybe take some more time to look for a job that's a better fit for their skills because they have the security of the small basic income to live? It gives them a safety net and allows people to take risks where it might. There's a lot of discussion about scarcity and how it affects decision making in the psychology community right now. So we're looking at things like attention and inhibitory control. So looking at how does decision making change? What are the processes? Does the sort of the time and the space that people have and the less worry about how are we going to pay rent this month, does it change their outlook? And how does that affect their decisions? And then really understanding a lot more about the effects on children, and we'll be able to track this long term. So, in terms of daycare, in terms of we can look at students' attendance and grades and things like that in the long way. So how does this sort of security affect the children? And finally, we're looking at social effects. So political, civic, and social behaviors. Do people become more involved in their communities? How do they become more involved in their neighborhoods? All sorts of changes like that. And just very briefly, I'm going to run through two stories from the feasibility study that we did. So one is Brianna. And Brianna worked part-time. She's a young woman. She lived in Oakland, California. She worked part-time, a seasonal job, so it was very unpredictable. She was kind of living couch to couch with family and friends. Rent is very expensive in that area. And once she received a basic income and that stability, she actually was able to get a full-time job, regular hours. She moved out slightly outside of the city to an area where housing is more affordable. She was able to move into an apartment with some friends. And she actually helped out some family members. She has a mother who's disabled, and so she shared some of the money with her mother to help support her, and spent her nephews and nieces. She also helped them. And even though she no longer receives the basic income, she still has that full-time job, and that sort of gave her the stability she needed. And then there's Irene. And Irene she's a student, and she was working several part-time jobs at this time. She was able to quit some of those jobs and really focus more on her studies. In this case, she worked fewer hours, but she was able to spend more time on her studies, and she became more involved in the community. She started volunteering for a local government official. There's a big activist community in the Bay Area, and she became involved there. And she actually, though it's not a bullet point here, she was actually able to move out to a different apartment in a safer area as well. So the range of outcomes, some will be transformative, some less so, but it just shows us the many things we might expect to see. So that is what we're planning, and I'm eager to talk more about it once we have results in a couple of years. So thank you very much.